I'm sorry, what is that?
That was the Joker.
And a spot-on Joker at that.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our second episode of the ARKHAM Sessions. My name is Brian Ward, and as always, I am joined by our co-host, Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
I'm excited to be here.
Are you?
Well, you just heard my laugh.
I did hear your laugh, and it was absolutely spot on. It is December 24th. For some of you, it's Christmas Eve. For others, it's, 21 days after Hanukkah. For others, it's 2 days before Kwanzaa. And if you're atheist, it's Tuesday. But either way, we want to welcome you guys to this episode. It's very special for us.
This is the second episode in Batman the Animated Series, which is the first time that we get introduced to the Joker.
If anyone, he is the yang to Batman's yin.
Right.
Just so you know, if you guys didn't hear the last episode, why not? But more importantly, we have chosen Batman the Animated Series because it adds a level of consistency for the Good Doctor's analysis of these characters. If I were Bill Finger, I could write Batman one way, or if I were Frank Miller, I could write him an entirely different way. That's not what we want to analyze. We don't want to argue between writers. We want to argue consistency. So if you're going to write for Batman the Animated Series, you have to maintain a certain level of consistency by sticking to the Writer's Bible, which was developed by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and Mitch Bryan when they were developing this series. And any writer that came in to write for it had to stick to these characters the way that they wanted them portrayed. That, I think, is going to be very valuable as we continue this podcast down the road.
Right, and for psychological relevance, this is extremely important because, as cliche as it sounds, the best way to predict future behavior is to look at past behavior. So consistency of the characters and their motivations and their behaviors is extremely important when it comes to really presenting realistic characters psychologically.
Great, so let's go into our second episode. This is Christmas with the Joker. It aired in mid-November, the 13th, I believe, 1992. It was written by Eddie Gorodetsky, and it was directed by Kent Butterworth.
Mr. Butterworth.
Mr. Butterworth. We've always wondered where Mr. Butterworth was.
He's writing episodes for Batman
the Animated Series. This one opens up uniquely. If you're going to have an introduction to the Joker, I guess this would be it. He is in what looks like the common area of Arkham Asylum. And he and a group of probably common thugs are singing Christmas carols.
Jingle bells, Batman smelt, Robin laid an egg.
A little bizarre that he would know that song.
It is very meta, but how do we know that he didn't write the song to begin with?
Maybe this was the debut of that song in that world.
And clearly he knew how the song was going to end.
And the Joker got away.
Just as he is putting that honorary star on top of the tree, and the Christmas tree launches through the roof.
It's a rocket.
It is a rocket, a very elaborate rocket. I can only imagine how long he has been planning this escape, given just how realistic that tree rocket must be. As a doctor who I'm sure has worked in environments maybe not exactly like this, what is the likelihood of seeing the Joker in a lineup of other criminals singing Jingle Bells?
Well, it's actually really common in, let's say a residential facility, which I've worked in a few, to have a common area, and especially during the holidays, to have, opportunities to socialize and to sing, help trim the tree, partake in the festivities, if you will. And that may include staff, clinicians, other residents, or patients at the facility where they can enjoy this kind of community type of event. Arkham Asylum, though, isn't just a psychiatric residential facility. It is a prison, right? I mean,
right.
They're inmates. They're not just patients.
Right.
So I think it's somewhat unrealistic to expect that someone with the Joker's history would be outside of his room and especially being given the opportunity to put together this elaborate Christmas tree rocket. So I imagine he had some help maybe from the staff there.
That's the interesting thing too, yeah, because someone had to bring that Christmas tree in. Someone chose that Christmas tree for the common area. Clearly the Joker didn't build it on his own. But we don't see any accomplices throughout this particular episode. Usually he's got henchmen, and the villain of the week has henchmen. Joker doesn't. We don't really see any henchmen in this episode. So I'm wondering who built that Christmas tree.
It's a mystery.
So Joker escapes, and we then go to Batman and Robin. So this is the first time that we've seen Robin. He is, I would say, teenager. 15, 16? He's in that rebellious teen age. But he is the one of the two of them who really wants to celebrate Christmas the way Christmas is meant to be celebrated. And that is with family. That is with a cozy fireplace, nice dinner, and, of course, It's a Wonderful Life.
Robin is actually seeking some time with Batman and some time to just, essentially, like you said, to be with family and to celebrate the holidays. But Batman is kind of pushing that idea away and kind of pushing Robin away in that sense, not really paying attention to his needs for connectedness and family, and to rather kind of turn his back on that.
Even scum spend the holidays with their families.
I think this episode, certainly more than the first one, and due to the nature of this podcast, we're not allowed to project further into episodes down the road. So certainly from what we've seen of Bruce and Batman, this episode really says more about him psychologically than even the Joker, in that he's not anti-family per se, but he even says he's never seen It's a Wonderful Life because he can't get past the title. He doesn't necessarily think that Gotham is safe for a night without them. He clearly doesn't know the city as well as he thinks he does, because he firmly believes that on Christmas Eve there's going to be some crime going on, and yet everything that he finds and sees it's a very peaceful city that night.
You just can't believe there's no use for us for one night.
Batman is sort of putting up some defense. The city needs him, and therefore he needs to be out there protecting citizens, when, as you mentioned, in the beginning of this episode, there's very little going on. There's not a lot of crime, and, Robin is sort of hinting that they don't really need to be out there. And
every time Robin makes a factual statement or a statement that proves to be true, Batman takes off. He's like, leave me alone.
Oh, bah humbug to you too.
Robin is trying to recreate this sense of family, togetherness, just spending a night on Christmas Eve watching a movie, and Batman doesn't seem to be motivated to recreate or have a sense of family right now. He's more fulfilled, and he feels more like himself being a protector, being on duty, being on guard, and ensuring that other people are safe, which is kind of an interesting construct, because Batman's interests right now are in making sure the city's safe and making sure that strangers are safe, and Robin's needs right now are to spend time with his father figure, the person that he considers his family.
So, go with me on this. Is Batman agitated because he doesn't get to beat people up? There's a moment where he thinks he's going to save a little old lady, and then the kid, who would typically be the thug in a situation like this, is actually giving her the gift that she dropped a couple of blocks back. Doesn't really get the sense that what he really wanted to do was help the old lady so much as I really want to beat up that kid.
And sometimes when you're looking for something, you see it everywhere. I mean, that happens to all of us. We kind of want to see something when it's not there. And so he's kind of projecting that these crimes are happening and they're not really happening.
Yeah.
Is he agitated that he's not beating people up? I think he's uncomfortable when he's not being Batman. Like, let's go down. I mean, I think that goes further to the distinction between Bruce Wayne and Batman, that he is, as Bruce Wayne, is he comfortable just being Bruce Wayne? Is he functional just being Bruce Wayne and not acting as Batman, not having this responsibility, this duty to protect, this need to avenge, the death of his parents? And I think this is one, it's funny because this is a, one can say this is a lighthearted Christmas episode. And
I think it's lighthearted in the cartoony plot of it, but psychologically speaking, this actually speaks volumes about Batman.
It does in that he has this invitation and this opportunity to be somewhat in what one would consider a normal interpersonal, close, emotional relationship with Robin. And I don't mean that any more than that they're family members and that they care about one another, and this is an opportunity for them to bond, for them to, as I said, kind of recreate their own family. And rather than embrace that, he has other interests right now. For one, he has this suspicion that this is a night that especially, is going to need some protection. But he also, I think what you're getting at, he has this unfulfilled need.
He's jonesing. He's
jonesing for it.
Yeah. Every opportunity, it's turned away, just increasingly agitated, until he finds out that the Joker's escaped, and then it's on. Now the Joker's escaped. The Joker has taken over a television station, and he has kidnapped Commissioner Gordon, Summer Gleason, and Harvey Bullock.
And here they are, the awful family.
Essentially creating his own family.
Which he does. He essentially, puts them in these sort of characters, right? So he has Commissioner Gordon as the father, Summer Gleason as the mother, and Detective Bullock as, I think he calls them, baby lawful. This is the awful lawful family, he says, and he's kind of put this family together. They're in these humiliating scenarios where they're kind of wrapped up as presents with bows, and they've got candy canes in their mouths, and
which you just kind of wonder why they don't eat them.
They could spit those candy canes out. It's a weird thing, but I actually think they're so, horribly frightened that they may think that if they do that, they will be harmed.
Right.
So just to put it into perspective, if these folks were really being traumatized in this way and being held hostage and being tied up by this person who's known to be very dangerous and homicidal, then you would keep that candy cane in your mouth. You're not spitting that out.
Right.
But you're right. He kind of creates this family, or this like mockery of a family, and puts them on display and sets up this sort of broadcast of the opposite of It's a Wonderful Life. Sort of.
Is he creating a family, or is Batman? I think what I'm getting at are Batman and Robin maybe the real family that he wants to spend time with?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. He chooses the holiday to break out of Arkham Asylum and lure Batman and Robin out of their home to come find him. To him, that's his family. That, especially Batman, that is the one person that knows him the best. Batman is his family. Batman and he are connected in a certain way.
The Joker ends up luring his real family out with the threat of harm or death to several people. He threatens to blow up a train, which Summer Gleason even says her mother is on, the 11:30 coming into Gotham. He takes over the Gotham Observatory and creates a phenomenally elaborate cannon out of the telescope. And then also has the TV station, or his hideout where he's broadcasting from. He's got Gordon and Gleason and Bullock all there.
And he's threatening to kill them. I mean, forget Man-Bat. This guy is homicidal. He's
got them hovering over, like they are hanging above basically a vat of.
He said that he's going to rub them out, which
Correct.
I think in BTAS that means
something entirely different than what it means
now.
Today.
Yes.
Yeah.
You get the sense that he's getting a thrill out of this risky behavior. It's not so much the end. It's not so much the gain. It's the means to that. It's the thrill of engaging in this risky behavior. It's the thrill of seeing people's reactions when they're frightened or horrified. It's the thrill of terrorizing other people. We know this about the Joker, even from his the first time we ever saw him in comics, that he accidentally stabbed himself and was laughing maniacally at that, like the idea that he's going to die. And I think in the dialogue with Batman, he even says, "The Joker's going to die," and just starts laughing. That ambivalence toward death, the the thrill seeking, this a little bit of a break from reality, really. We see that he is he's very different than someone who would engage in violent behavior and not really have affect. When I say affect, I mean like emotional involvement with it.
Right.
He is emotionally involved. He's getting a thrill out of it. I even want to go so far and say he connects with people, and he emotionally connects with Batman when he's terrorizing.
He's not what people would classify a sociopath or.
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because a sociopath, what used to be called a psychopath, but now it's called a sociopath, these are not terms that refer to a mental illness. These are terms that refer to like a trait. Some people have this trait where they have sociopathic tendencies, and it's typically used in court cases to describe people that have engaged in really violent behavior, homicide and rape, and just really horrific stuff, because the people that are high on this psychopathic or sociopathic trait tend to have very little remorse about what they're doing, tend to engage in this violent behavior, are narcissistic. And yet, while this is certainly a trait that we might see in the Joker, it doesn't necessarily capture his presentation that well. The mental illness that we would think of when we think of somebody that lacks remorse, that doesn't really connect with people, that engages in violence, is something called antisocial personality disorder. And that's a long-standing, very pervasive disorder, typically found in men, actually, who engage in these violent behaviors and they don't have a lot of remorse about it. But the Joker's different than that, right? He wants to actually connect with other people, which is actually more consistent with something called borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is another personality disorder that's also very pervasive, very long-standing, but it involves actually the instability of the self and a lot of more emotionality. So with the Joker, as I said, we're sort of seeing his attempts or his need to connect with other people. Now, he does it in really frightening and maladaptive and bizarre ways, right? With his style. But we're seeing that he's actually making attempts to connect with Batman in some way.
So what you're saying is you would lean more toward borderline personality disorder for someone like the Joker. But what you just described about antisocial personality disorder might be a little Batman-y, a someone who doesn't necessarily want to connect or feel the need to connect, doesn't necessarily understand, would do the beating up of the thug if it meant an end game of no more crime in Gotham or whatever.
No. I mean, I think that's not true of Batman. I mean, while I agree that he
won't kill them.
No, he's somewhat disconnected and he's distant, and he does have trouble regulating those feelings, because when other people say, "Hey, I want to connect with you, I want to spend time with you," he's uncomfortable because he hasn't really had, as an adult, and as a young adolescent and teen growing up, he's not had a lot of these opportunities. So he's not fully equipped. He may not be adept at really understanding and being skillful at connecting with others. But I would argue that he still wants to do that. For him, maybe spending time with Robin patrolling the streets, being a mentor, teaching him how to protect himself, teaching him the ways of the bat, that could be his way of really bonding and connecting. They have a mission, and that mission is extremely important to him. And he's not amoral. People who have when we talked about antisocial personality disorder, those are folks who do not have a moral compass. They will, they will engage in really as it's called, antisocial, really pervasively violent, careless, reckless types of things to get something personal out of it, to get something, some gain from it. And as I said, that doesn't really capture the Joker either, because it's funny that when most people think of borderline personality disorder, one of the most, I guess, famous or well-known fictional characters is from that movie with Michael Douglas and Glenn Close.
Fatal Attraction.
Fatal Attraction, right. She's this, woman in love who really wants to get what she wants, and she really engages in these,
she'll boil your pet rabbit.
She will boil your rabbit, but she will also engage in self-harm. She'll be incredibly emotional. She'll do terrible things to get closer to you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Joker, even though he's male, studies are now showing that some earlier statistics about more women falling under borderline personality disorder were not so accurate. That initially that diagnosis was sort of kind of more appropriate for women, and they're finding that that the prevalence or the split between men and women may actually be about half and half when it comes to the folks that are diagnosed with when it comes to folks that present with these symptoms. But that in men, rather than having that Glenn Close character of hurting themselves and being incredibly emotional and being out of control, males with this disorder will engage in rage and aggression, that they'll act out in aggressive ways because that may be more, I guess, socially appropriate in this context for them to act out. Essentially, they have incredibly unstable relationships, but they also have this unstable sense of self, and they do not know how to connect with other people, and their way to do that is to act out. So you can imagine, or at least I would imagine, that the Joker is one of these people that looks in the mirror and really has this fragmented sense of self, this hatred for himself, this confusion about himself, and feels very alone and isolated and has really no way to connect with others. This is his way of connecting with someone else and feeling human with someone else. And Batman is the best person that he knows to do that with.
Let them go, Joker. It's me you want.
Merry Christmas, Batman!
So how would you go about treating someone with what sounds like borderline personality disorder?
Typically, one would use individual psychotherapy and group psychotherapy. One very well-known and very effective treatment is called dialectical behavioral therapy, otherwise known as DBT, to help someone to sort of see the way in which they're relating to others and connecting with others is maladaptive, or in other words, it's a style that doesn't work well and that may make them feel worse, if that makes sense, and to teach them other ways, other more healthy ways, adaptive ways to connect with other people. It depends on what else is going on, and I would actually argue that with Joker, there are a number of things going on that, as strong as, this conviction I have is that he might have borderline personality disorder, he very well could have additional co-occurring, or what we call comorbid types of conditions.
So he might not just be limited to borderline, he might also have additional problems
absolutely, that would be more realistic. So he's incredibly complex, and I think that there would be a lot of work in trying to understand what else it is that he's dealing with and trying to formulate a treatment that best fits him. But at the end of the episode, he ends up back in Arkham. Mm-hmm. The solution for him is to put him back in Arkham.
And he seems okay with that. I mean, it seems like he sort of got the thing that he really wanted. He wanted to connect with Batman. He wanted to put a pie in Batman's face. I mean, he was willing to kill people to do it. But the end game, what he really wanted was to put a pie into Batman's face.
Right. That's how the episode ends. All of that dangerous behavior and all these people's lives at risk. And all he does,
to give him a present.
He just throws a pie in his face, which I think, it's this, sort of laughable relationship that they have, that he does not want to kill him.
Right.
He just wants to engage with him and to connect with him. And at the very end, he wants to throw a pie in his face, and he's fulfilled by that.
Yeah. So he's okay with being back in.
Yeah, I mean, he's back in isolation. He's got the straitjacket, and he's sort of singing.
And what I find interesting is after you see the Joker laughing and singing, and he's clearly okay with being back home for lack of a better term. We then go to Bruce and Dick and Alfred having just watched It's a Wonderful Life. And Bruce is now happy.
And it is a wonderful life.
It has its moments.
And he's grinning.
Yeah, and he's not talking about the movie. He's talking about his own life. He's talking about being Batman. Being Batman is a wonderful life. It's got its moments.
Right.
You know, like, and I think he's as fulfilled with that night as the Joker was.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He spent the whole Christmas Eve with the Joker, and that to him, that's what was fulfilling to him.
Batman's messed up. I think he has antisocial personality disorder.
He does not.
Not yet.
Stay tuned.
That's right. And this plan, by the way, is phenomenally elaborate. I mean, this is a guy who clearly has put a lot of effort into not only coming up with the rocket tree, but he's also figured out a way to take over the television station. He gets the folks, the appropriate folks. I mean, I don't think Gordon and Gleason and Bullock were all hanging out together.
Oh, he clearly had to kidnap them.
He had to get each one. He had to dress them up as presents. He had to give them candy canes. He also turned the Gotham Observatory into a giant cannon. He went through mass production of Joker gun turret robot statue
He had
things.
like 6 or 8 life-size Joker, robot machines that were, shooting at Batman and Robin. I have no idea where
He
when this all
constructed
happened.
the entire cardboard audience
This is
for
true.
the studio. I mean, and I think he even had a set, like sort of a set in the background that was very Joker-centered. This guy had put a lot of effort into creating the perfect Christmas Eve night. He was wearing a jacket that he knew if tugged on, he could get out of and still have arms. Like the only thing that he didn't necessarily plan, and even then we can't say that this is true, was the wayward roller skate that ultimately ended up to him.
He probably planned that too.
He may have planned it because he knew that he would get caught on his way down into the vat of hot boiling molten steel.
Yes.
Which, by the way, in that moment, Batman even shows off maybe a little bit of a sadistic side in that he catches the Joker and then sort of tortures him a little bit by lowering him a little bit further.
Was that him lowering him into, the molten steel or whatever? Or was he, I thought his grip kind of loosened
I
up.
don't think Batman's grip ever loosens. Like, I think Batman knew full well because then we cut to him and he's sort of smiling. He's like, "Merry Christmas, Joker." Like, he was about to dip him. I mean, he wasn't going to, but he certainly wanted him to think he was.
You're right. This is a lot of investment, a lot of planning, a lot of executive functioning. I mean, just so much kind of future-oriented types of planning and thinking that is indicative of high-functioning person. Like, just the idea that he's doing this by himself. Sometimes we see he has henchmen, he has other helpers, but my understanding is that he did this on his own. And so that's someone who, as I said, there's a number of things that he could be suffering from in terms of mental illness, but he clearly has, high cognitive functioning at this point.
Oh, and we didn't even talk about the fact that he built those gigantic robot toys, the toy soldiers that have the bayonets and
the teddy bears.
Yeah, they're playing the Nutcracker Suite.
So I have a question about that, because throughout this episode you're hearing sort of this Danny Elfman-esque Christmas music, and I think the Nutcracker is playing.
Yeah.
Did they pay for the rights to play the Nutcracker?
Well, in the case of the Nutcracker Suite, that was written by Tchaikovsky 100 years ago. So
they paid him?
Yeah, they paid his estate. No, that falls within the realm of royalty free because no one has the copyright on Tchaikovsky. What they would normally do is you wouldn't pay for publishing for Tchaikovsky's music, but you would pay for the master. So whatever recording you used, you would pay for that recording. In this case, I think they clearly got their own orchestra to create the music for this. So you just pay for the orchestra. You don't necessarily, and you pay for whoever sort of created that arrangement of the music.
Oh, I see.
But you're essentially creating your own version of the music. So you're not actually having to license Tchaikovsky's music from the ballet.
I see. That's interesting.
So we introduced something last week that I think is kind of fun. It might be a little morbid, but it's sort of a way of bringing it all down to reality, showing you that some of these things really can happen in life. Sure, we could talk about people who dress up as creepy clowns, but I'm not sure there is a 1-to-1 ratio for the Joker. But there is actually someone who has taken over a television station. In October of 1980, a guy by the name of James Hoskins actually went in armed with 5 revolvers, a semi-automatic rifle, and seized control of a newsroom in Ohio, I believe. And there he held a reporter by the name of Elaine Green, her cameraman, and several other, I think it was 7 other hostages in the control room and in the studio until he could get what he wanted. And
what was it like Halloween with the Hoskins? Did he want candy?
He may have wanted a little bit of candy. Actually, he described himself as a terrorist. He got an interview, which actually Elaine then ended up winning an award for. I believe she got the Peabody Award for conducting this interview. And he admitted that he had murdered his girlfriend earlier that day. And he was basically just kind of talking about how unhappy he was with the government, especially local government, but with the government. So he was one of those guys. He then let everyone out and sadly ended up shooting himself in the studio. But that is a case of someone doing what essentially the Joker did with Commissioner Gordon and Summer Gleason and Harvey Bullock. He didn't dress them up as presents, obviously, but those folks certainly must have felt as terrorized as Gordon and Gleason and Bullock. As a psychologist, and a psychologist who is certainly specialized in trauma, what might those people have been dealing with after that case? I mean, what could have Gordon and Bullock and Gleason have been dealing with after the Joker?
Yeah, without question, that experience could have been very traumatizing for them. And I think that there's this, there's clearly, because the Joker is unpredictable and because he is so potentially callous and homicidal, they may have believed that they would die that night. And I think that, just that itself could be very frightening for them. But without question, having that experience will have an impact on them after that day. They could very well see Christmas and Christmas Eve entirely different for, several years after this because of this event. Who's next?
Next, we've got the Scarecrow.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. I would imagine for you, this would be particularly special.
It is. It is for me. He likes to traumatize other people with the phobias, the anxieties, the fear.
Yeah. So definitely come back and join us next week for episode 3 of the ARKHAM Sessions with Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And Brian Ward.
That's it for this week. Have very happy holidays. See you next week, guys. Spot on. Christmas Eve. For others, it's 21 days after Hanukkah. For others, it's 2 days before Kwanzaa. And if you're atheist, it's Tuesday. But either way, we want to welcome you guys to this episode. It's very special for us.
This is the second episode in Batman the Animated Series, which is the first time that we get introduced to the Joker.
If anyone, he is the yang to Batman's yin.
Right.
Just so you know, if you guys didn't hear the last episode, why not? But more importantly, we have chosen Batman the Animated Series because it adds a level of consistency for the Good Doctor's analysis of these characters. If I were Bill Finger, I could write Batman one way, or if I were Frank Miller, I could write him an entirely different way. That's not what we want to analyze. We don't want to argue between writers. We want to argue consistency. So I'm sorry, what is that?
That was the Joker.
And a spot-on Joker at that.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, welcome to our second episode of the ARKHAM Sessions. My name is Brian Ward, and as always, I am joined by our co-host, Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
I'm excited to be here.
Are you?
Well, you just heard my laugh.
I did hear your laugh, and it was absolutely spot on. It is December 24th. For some of you, it's Christmas. If you're going to write for Batman the Animated Series, you have to maintain a certain level of consistency by sticking to the Writer's Bible, which was developed by Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and Mitch Bryan when they were developing this series. And any writer that came in to write for it had to stick to these characters the way that they wanted them portrayed. That, I think, is going to be very valuable as we continue this podcast down the road.
Right, and for psychological relevance, this is extremely important because, as cliche as it sounds, the best way to predict future behavior is to look at past behavior. So consistency of the characters and their motivations and their behaviors is extremely important when it comes to really presenting realistic characters psychologically.
Great, so let's go into our second episode. This is Christmas with the Joker. It aired in mid-November, the 13th, I believe, 1992. It was written by Eddie Gorodetsky, and it was directed by Kent Butterworth.
Mr. Butterworth.
Mr. Butterworth. We've always wondered where Mr. Butterworth was.
He's writing episodes for Batman
the Animated Series. This one opens up uniquely. If you're going to have an introduction to the Joker, I guess this would be it. He is in what looks like the common area of Arkham Asylum. And he and a group of probably common thugs are singing Christmas carols.
Jingle bells, Batman smelt, Robin laid an egg.
A little bizarre that he would know that song.
It is very meta, but how do we know that he didn't write the song to begin with?
Maybe this was the debut of that song in that world.
And clearly he knew how the song was going to end.
And the Joker got away.
Just as he is putting that honorary star on top of the tree, and the Christmas tree launches through the roof.
It's a rocket.
It is a rocket, a very elaborate rocket. I can only imagine how long he has been planning this escape, given just how realistic that tree rocket must be. As a doctor who I'm sure has worked in environments maybe not exactly like this, what is the likelihood of seeing the Joker in a lineup of other criminals singing Jingle Bells?
Well, it's actually really common in, like, let's say a residential facility, which I've worked in a few, to have like a common area, and especially during the holidays to have, opportunities to socialize and to sing, help trim the tree, partake in the festivities, if you will. And that may include staff, clinicians, other residents, or patients at the facility.